Welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at Brass Lancashire. It's a 2 to 4 player hand management, route building, tile placement game where you take the role of one of England's Industrial Revolution historical figures, trying to expand your empire by establishing rails and canals, by building and developing cotton mills, coal mines, ironworks, ports, and shipyards. Trying to become the most successful entrepreneur. How do you become the most successful entrepreneur and win the game? By having the most victory points at the end of the second era, or the rail era. Now that we know what the winning condition is, let's take a look at the components, the setup, and how an era, round, and turn work in Brass Lancashire. Now let's look at the components for Brass Lancashire. We're going to start with the general components. You have the main game board in the center of the table here. You have one side that is for all player counts, and then you have a second side that is for a more advanced 2-player variant. Next we have the deck tile. We have the cotton market tiles. Then we have the cotton market token, iron cubes, coal cubes, and then we have money, or the bank, that you see over here on the right side. Now let's look at the player components. We have the player mat, you have the player aid, and then in each of the 4 colors you have a character tile, link tiles that have the canal and the rails on them, industry tiles, a victory point marker, and an income marker. Now let's look at the setup for Brass Lancashire. We're going to be setting this up for a 2-player game which takes 10 general steps and 10 player steps. Step 1, place the main game board in the center of the table, making sure that you choose the correct side. So you're going to have one side that has 1 through 4, which is good for all player counts, and then you're going to have one side that is an advanced 2-player setup. Step number 2, you are going to remove all the tiles and cards that do not have your player count on them. So if this was a 2-player game, cards with just a 4 or a 3 and a 4 would be removed. Step number 3 is to shuffle and place your draw deck. Step number 4, you're going to insert the deck tile with the rocket side face up into the deck, and you're going to have the number of players amount of cards underneath this tile. So in a 2-player game, you would have all the cards stacked on top and then 2 cards stacked underneath. In a 3-player game, you'd have 3 underneath, and in a 4-player game, you would have 4. Step number 5, you're going to shuffle and place your distant cotton mill tiles. Step number 6, you're going to place your distant cotton market marker on the top left space. Step number 7, you're going to create your coal market. To create your coal market, you're going to place your coal cubes in the squares in the top right corner of the board. Step number 8, you're going to create your iron market by taking the iron cubes and placing them on the squares in the top right corner of the board. Step number 9, you're going to take the excess iron and coal cubes and place them onto the side of the board to create a general supply. Step number 10, you're going to create a bank by putting all of your money tiles together to the side of the board. Now let's look at the 10 player steps for setup. Step number 1 is to get a player mat and place it in front of you. Step number 2 is to get 30 pounds from the bank. Step number 3 is to choose a character and take all of the tokens of that color. Step number 4 is to place your link tiles to the side of your player mat. Step number 5 is to stack and place your industry tiles on your player mat. Step number 6 is to place your victory point hex at 0. Step number 7 is to place your income marker at 10. Step number 8 is to draw a starting hand, which means you're going to draw 8 cards from the draw deck. Step number 9 is to designate a discard area for your cards. Step number 10 is to choose turn order by shuffling your character tiles and placing them on the turn order track. Now let's look at how an era, round, and turn work in Brass Lancashire. A game consists of 2 eras, the canal and the rail era. Each era lasts until the draw deck and the player's hands have been exhausted, which will be exactly 8 to 10 rounds based on the player count. If it's a 2-player game, you'll have exactly 10 rounds, 3-player game will have exactly 9 rounds, and a 4-player game will have exactly 8 rounds. Each round consists of 3 phases. Phase 1 is the player turns, Phase 2 is the adjust turn order, and Phase 3 is to get income. Phase 1 is the player turns. For the first round of the game, you're going to be taking only 1 action. Then starting in round 2, and for the rest of the game, you'll be taking 2 actions during this phase. There are 5 possible actions that you can take: build, network, develop, sell, and loan. Additionally, there is an option to pass. So you will have to discard a card for each time you choose to pass on an action. For each one of these possible actions, you're going to discard a card for each, and then at the end of your turn, you'll be drawing back up to 8 cards from the draw deck. Also, all money spent during this phase goes onto your character tile. This will help determine turn order in phase 2. Now let's look closely at each of the possible actions. Action number 1 is the build action. To do this, you're going to discard a card from your hand and pay the cost to place an industry tile. If it's a location card, then that particular industry tile will go in that location. So if you discarded Liverpool, you could place one of your industry tiles in the Liverpool location. If it's an industry card, then you have to place that tile in your network, which is your connections on the board, unless it's your first tile or link. Then it could go anywhere on the board. Once you have decided on your location or your industry, so in this case we'll choose Warrington, you are then going to place the lowest level of that industry, or in this case our location, so it's going to be the lowest of any of the industries on that particular place on the board. So we're going to choose the coal mine, and we're going to place that on Warrington. And if you're placing it, you want to go with the location that has the icon by itself, but in this case there's one that is a combination, and so you'll place the coal mine there. Now we're going to go ahead and pay the cost for that. So in this particular case it is 5, and so we would place that on our character tile. If we had a cost of an iron or coal for a particular tile to be placed, you would have to pay its cost or consume the iron or coal. If it cost coal, or you had to consume coal, you can use any player's coal cubes that are in your network. And if there are none in your network, you can buy them from the market if you are connected to a market. These locations are the ones that have the 2 arrows. If it costs iron, you can use your iron cubes in your network only, or you can buy them from the market paying the pound cost of that particular row. If you built a coal mine or ironworks, you're going to place the cubes on that tile. Then you're going to fill in the markets from those cubes. If it is a coal mine, it has to be connected to a market location to fill in. Iron cubes are always going to fill in the market first. When you're filling in the market, you're going to be paying that player for each cube the amount of pounds for that particular location in the market. Now, when all of your cubes have been used off of your coal mine or your iron works, that particular tile is flipped over, and then you increase your income. When building shipyards, those tiles are immediately flipped once they are placed. Now, there are a couple of special building rules based on the era. In the canal era, you can only have one of your own tiles in each of the locations. Also in the canal era, you cannot build any of the white and black circles from your player mat. In the rail era, you cannot build any of the blue and white circles from your player mat. but you can build any amount on any location. So you could have 2 or 3 of your own player tiles in one particular location. And then lastly is the overbuild. You can replace your own tile by putting the cubes back to the supply and taking the tile out of the game. And then you can also replace someone else's ironworks or coal mine if there are none of those cubes on the board or in their market. Action number 2 is the network action. You are going to discard a card and then build a canal or rail. So discard any card and place it in your discard pile, and then you are going to place a link in your network unless it's your first link and you have no industry tiles on the board, in which case you could place it on any link. When it comes to canals, those are the blue lines you see on the board connecting locations, and then they will cost you £3 per link. So when you're building that canal, it would cost you £3. During the rail era, you are going to be placing the rail lines instead of the canal, and those cost £5 for one link tile. You can also play 2 link tiles by paying £15. Each one of your link tiles during the rail era costs you 1 coal each. Action number 3 is the develop action. You are going to discard a card and discard tiles. So for this particular action, you will discard any card from your hand, and that will allow you to then discard 1 or 2 of your lowest level of any industry tile. When doing this, you're going to also pay 1 iron for each tile you discard. When you are discarding these industry tiles, you will put them back in the game box. Action number 4 is the sell action. You are going to discard a card to flip a cotton mill. So to perform this action, you start by discarding any card from your hand and choosing 1 unflipped cotton mill to sell by either using one of the ports that you have in your network, or if you are connected to a distant cotton market. If you choose to use your port, you are going to flip over your port tile and also advance your income. If you choose to use your connection to the distant cotton market, you are going to flip over the cotton market tile and advance the marker, the number of spaces that it says on the tile. Once you do that, you are going to then take and increase your income based off of what you see to the left of that particular row of the marker in the distant cotton market. If the marker gets to the X, then you stop your sell action there. But if it doesn't, or if you used a port, it is at this point that you would flip over your cotton mill tile, advance your income, and then repeat the process if you choose to do so. Possible action number 5 is the loan action, where you discard a card to gain money. For this particular action, you're going to discard any card, and then you're going to take either £10, £20, or £30 from the bank. Depending upon the amount that you take, you will drop your income that many levels. So if you took £30 and your income was on 18, you would drop your income down to the 12 mark. Once every player has taken their actions during the player turns phase, we move on to phase 2, which is the adjust turn order. During this phase, based on the amount of money spent, we will be adjusting the turn order. The lowest money spent will then go first in the next round. So in this case, purple spent 5, yellow didn't spend anything, so yellow would go first and purple would go second. Then we'll take the money that were on the character tiles and put it back in the bank. This brings us to phase 3, which is the get income phase, and then each player will gain the amount of income they have based on the income markers. Rounds will continue on until the draw deck and the player's hands have both been exhausted, which will indicate the end of the era. Now, whether it's the canal or rail era, there are end of era steps that you will take. If it's the end of the canal era, there are 6 steps. Step number 1 is to score canal links. For this, you're going to score 1 victory point per connection hexagon that a canal is adjacent to. Step number 2 is to score flipped industry tiles. Any industry tile that you have on the board that is flipped over is going to score the amount of victory points that you see in a black hexagon. Step number 3 is to remove obsolete industries, which means that you'll remove any of the level 1 industries from the board. Step number 4 is to reset the distant cotton market, which means you're going to place the marker in the top left spot on the track. Then you're going to take the distant cotton market tiles from the draw area and the discarded area, shuffle and place them face down back in the draw area. Step number 5 is to shuffle the draw deck. That means you're going to take all of your discarded cards and the cards that were underneath the deck tile, shuffle them, and then you're going to place them on the draw deck space. Step number 6 is to insert the deck tile, which means you're going to take the deck tile, flip it over, and then you're going to place a number of cards underneath it based on the number of players. So you're going to place double the amount of cards underneath that tile. So if it's a 2-player game, you're going to place 4 cards under that tile. If it's a 3-player game, you place 6 under the tile, and if it's a 4-player game, you place 8. Then each player will draw up to 8 cards, and we're ready to start the rail era. Rounds will continue in the rail era until the draw deck has been exhausted along with your player hands. Once that has taken place, there are 3 steps at the end of the rail era. Step 1 is the score rail length. This is the same step as the canal era. Step 2 is to score flipped industry tiles that you have on the board. And then step 3 is to score 1 victory point for every 10 pounds you have. After you've done these steps in the rail era, whoever has the most victory points is considered to be the most successful entrepreneur and wins Brass Lancashire.